So welcome everyone to Voices of Word Up. We of Word Up acknowledge that some of us are situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and Huron-Wendat people. Word Up is dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and are committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. We share in the heartbreak of families impacted by the tragic discovery of the 215 children in the mass grave in Kamloops Residential School, giving this acknowledgement deeper importance to us. So with that said, we will begin the June 10th Word Up. Tonight's panel is on LGBTQ in writing. We categorize each other as a way to describe and assign differences, including classified by race, ethnicity, social class, disability, gender, and sexual orientation. With regard to LGBTQ, we'll discuss these categories respectfully with the aim to come out the other side able to create and develop characters that avoid perpetrating stereotypes and with a deeper understanding of one another. That is our hope. Colleen will begin by asking our three panelists, Kate Heartfield, Nigel Thomas, and David Kingston Yeh, our questions. You'll then have an opportunity to present your queries, and then we'll end with open mic. So take it away, Colleen.
All right, thanks, Linda. Before we start, I just want to establish a few norms that when the panel is on, if you can mute your mics so that we don't get any feedback and interruptions, that would be great. I ask that we all just maintain an area of respect. We all come from different areas and different backgrounds, and we're all here to learn. So just let's be respectful of each other. And I want to thank everybody for coming and sharing your knowledge with us. We really appreciate you taking the time to come. So what we're going to do to start is I will rotate with each question. We'll start with a different person. And if I get, confused, you can just tell me I've got it mixed up. But what we'll do to start is each of the authors will have a chance to introduce themselves. So why don't we start in alphabetical order? So Kate, if you want to go first, that would be great.
Oh, right. I'm so seldom the first in alphabetical order. This is nice. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here and pleased to meet everybody. My name is Kate Heartfield. My pronouns are she and her, and I live just in the rural fringe of Ottawa, Ontario. And I am a writer of science fiction and fantasy, frequently in historical settings. I'm a cisgender bisexual writer, and so I have a lot of queer topics in my fiction. So I've had one novel published, Armed in Her Fashion, and I have another coming out next year, and I have a few novellas, including two time travel novellas with a female couple in them. They're called Alice Payne Arrives and Alice Payne Rides. And stories in a bunch of different Canadian anthologies and some journals and magazines. And I also write interactive fiction. I have two big interactive projects from a company called Choice of Games, and they're really great because they allow for kind of a range of sexualities, and you can play and have romances in lots of different ways or none at all. So just sort of a shout out to that as well. Happy to be here.
Why, thank you, Kate. I'd love to learn more about that interactive game writing. It must, not maybe at the moment, but fascinating. So I believe it is Nigel. No, sorry, David. David, if you want to go next.
Alphabetically. I'm typically last alphabetically. So hello, everyone. It's a pleasure being here. So once again, my name is David, and I go by he and him pronouns. I also identify as cisgender, gay. I'm a Chinese Canadian man born in Kingston, Ontario, home of the tragically hip. But about 25 years ago, I did move to Toronto and to go to school, and I'm still here. I'm zooming in from downtown Toronto. And arriving in the city was a time of my life which was a very cathartic and transformative moment for me, just coming into my own, stepping out as a young gay guy in his early 20s, connecting with everything that Toronto and its urban culture has to offer. And about 15 years ago, I was very lucky. I had the opportunity to start working at a mental health agency in downtown Toronto, right by Church and Wellesley, right in the heart of what we might call the Toronto gay village. And I work specifically in a program that serves 2S LGBTQ clients. So I work as a counselor, as a therapist with queer and trans youth and young adults. So every day I'm listening to and witnessing their stories. And this experience has been, first of all, just an extraordinary privilege. And as writers, as a storyteller, it's been an extraordinary resource. Right? They say, write what you know. I think it was Mark Twain who said that. So it's no coincidence that the two novels that I've published to date, both of them are contemporary novels set in Toronto, set in the early 2000s, featuring this colorful cast of young queer and trans millennials and all of their misadventures. And right now I'm just about finishing off a third book that kind of wraps up what's turned out to be a series of 3 books that began with my first 2. And in this whole process, I feel it's important to say that it's key for me to be able to depict authentically and honestly and to celebrate just the diversity of lived experiences of young queer and trans folks in Canada. So I'm very excited to be here, especially on this panel, addressing the topics and themes in front of us.
Thanks, David. I imagine your work must provide you with endless amounts of material for your writing. Yes, and just the, all the individuals you get to encounter, and it must be wonderful. So Nigel, you're up next.
Yeah, probably probably prefer to listen to you guys. Your life sounds so interesting. I come from a tiny island in the Caribbean that's called St. Vincent, and I left there in 1968. Interestingly enough, when I left, I was engaged to be married because I did not really want to endure the persecution that I would have otherwise endured if I hadn't, because I was sort of what people back home would call effeminate. And if you were subjected to harassment and you had to prove that you weren't gay. So I came here and I actually did not even know that there was something of a somewhat more liberated gay life. And I discovered it accidentally, and it gave me the opportunity to break off my engagement and to pursue a more authentic life. I am a retired professor of United States literature. I have written 12 books. I have 12 published books. 2 of them are academic, 1 collection of poems. The rest is fiction, short stories and novels. And I'm actually currently working on a quartet of novels that follow the lives of primarily three fellows from St. Vincent. And they're of 2 of them, brothers, are of the middle class. The third one, who is husband to the older brother, comes from a more of let me just say struggling class rather than any sort of other category. What can I say? My approach to my characters is simply that as human beings, we're struggling to deal with everything that life throws at us. And that might be more difficult if you happen to be gay and you're living in a Black community, certainly in the Caribbean, West Africa, the United States of America. Of course, my characters tend to be in the Caribbean, and I certainly explore some of what they put up with, and why, in fact, many choose to leave, so on, among other things. As I said, my characters are full-fledged human beings, and so they also have to face the challenges that all human beings face, and that's the perspective from which I write. And my real reason for writing is that I just find I have a strong desire to get behind the facade of things, and so on. So that drives my writing primarily. I think that's it. Yep.
So were you a writer before you left the Caribbean? Have you always written?
I found myself saying no to that question, and yet it's not altogether true, because when I was 19, 20, I came here at 21, I did write a couple of short plays, and I did direct them as well, and they were very well received, actually. They were very well received, but I never kept copies of them, and I never thought of myself as a writer then. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, thank you everybody for your introductions. It's great to have such a diverse group of authors here tonight. What I'd like to do now is to get into some of the questions we've sort of talked about earlier. And what I'll do is we'll start with one person, and everybody will have a chance to sort of weigh in. If you don't have anything to add, if you're the third person and don't have anything to add, that's fine. But that's sort of how we work, and everybody will get a chance to speak first at some point. So so first question, what are your worst assumptions, cliches, or offenses writers have made when creating LGBTQ characters? And before we started the meeting, we talked a little bit about, what exactly are cliches. And so if you want, you can sort of go back and talk about traditionally some of the cliches and sort of things that were wrong in some of the stories that were, I'm not sure wrong is the right word, in some of the stories that you used. So David, do you want to weigh in first on this?
Oh my goodness, where to begin, right? The obvious stereotypes, I mean, in 2021, I hope they're apparent to everyone, right? That gays are mentally ill, they're villainous, they're depraved, etc. They have HIV/AIDS. Just these awful. It just sounds so. I'll say anachronistic, but I'll say just dirty in my mouth, right? And I do know that I live in Toronto in a bubble, and that even in a country like Canada, homophobia, transphobia is alive and well. So I don't take it for granted that these kinds of stereotypes are something of the past by any means. So I'll pause there. We could go on at length about this.
Well,
Oh,
if you want to, do you want? No, go ahead.
Sorry. I'd like to suggest that Disney is a really good touchstone. It reflects a zeitgeist. And if you track the narratives of Disney movies or Disney productions from the 1950s onwards, you can see how these depictions of queer characters or subtext, right? We look at gay subtext, evolves over the years. I'll just leave it at that. I don't mean to be provocative, but I offer that as a playful kind of analogy.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about that, but feel free to jump back in after Nigel and Kate have weighed in. Like, it's very informal here. We don't need to be too strict on our rules. So Nigel, if you wanted to come next.
Well, I would add to the list that David has just provided. It's that the other one is that we're all pedophile predators. That we're after, in the case of male gays, we're after young boys. And in my latest novel, I reference a document that was published in the press in my own St. Vincent that said that we had an agenda to turn all young boys into gays. And so we were supposed to be watched and policed and perhaps persecuted. I found, and for example, a minister of government in St. Vincent suggested that whenever he saw gays, he wanted to set them on fire. And this is as recent as 8 years ago. So recently, for example, there was a demonstration put on in my St. Vincent. They said 20,000 people were in attendance, but I think it was more like 8,000. It was sponsored by the Christian Evangelical Association, the Christian Right. And I noticed, for example, in the comments following the newspaper's accounting of it, some comments that reference me, for example, because I've taken on homophobia in St. Vincent. And the point was, you better be prepared if you come back here with a man to wear clothing that can withstand a shower of stones. Yeah, those are the sorts of things that you deal with, and you shrug them off as best you can, and so on. Yeah. But some people don't, and I mentioned earlier on that this novel is dedicated to a young man who killed himself. He drank poison because he simply could not put up with the harassment he was dealing with in his community. So, yeah, you deal with it. Yeah.
Yes, so Kate, you have the final word.
Yeah, it is a big topic. I came up reading science fiction, and I think the first explicitly not straight character that I encountered was the Baron Harkonnen in Dune, who is a villain, and an abuser of children and that kind of thing. I still love Dune despite the problems in it, but I think definitely that was my introduction. And I think that we have moved past that kind of villainous caricature to a large extent, but it always comes back up in different cycles, and we see that exact same portrayal of predatory villains when it comes especially to, say, trans women, for example. So I think this idea that the idea of the predator is still very much there in fiction today. And I think there are other tropes and patterns that are more well-meant, but can still perpetuate harm. So one thing that we see a lot is the sort of, the idea of the gay character who is probably the only one in the book and has a tragic end. Whereas, in real life, we tend to know each other, and so we have friends, and we have communities, and we have families and found families, and also our lives are not entirely tragic, right? So I think that kind of idea that tragedy has to follow is something worth interrogating. And there are a lot more out there, and I think sort of, if you're a writer who does not belong to that community or identity, just sort of Googling even things like TV tropes can illuminate a lot of the sort of patterns that people fall into over and over again, and that is a good place to kind of start to see what some of your own assumptions might be.
Yeah, and I think that's fairly, I love your point about, discovering what your own assumptions are, because you might not even be aware of what they are. And I always love going in and finding somebody else's perspective and just sort of doing a double take on thing and realizing, that, I'm racist, I'm sexist, I'm, like everybody's a little bit of all of that, right? And it's just that awareness. It's a bit painful, but it's so eye-opening. I was at the CanCon conference, and do you think there's more of an acceptance within the sci-fi community for different genders and different identities?
That's a very interesting question. I think in our community, a word I use advisedly because it means so many different things, but you know, I definitely do think that there is a really thriving queer science fiction and fantasy community, which is fantastic. It's fraught and difficult, and there's also a lot of bigots, and you know, so it's like anything else, it's a complicated question. But I think, you know, it is a kind of fiction that is asking questions about what next and what if, and I think sort of by that nature maybe is a good place to sort of interrogate assumptions, but maybe that's too sunny of you. I don't know. I saw David had something to say though, so I'll pass it over to him.
I immediately thought of Ursula K. Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness, and that's some decades ago. And just working with young people, you know, young trans and queer people, they're huge cosplayers, and they're loving fantasy and role-playing games and video games. And why is that the case? Because this is a vehicle, it's a venue where we can play out, where we can perform these authentic senses of gender and just life. And so I have to confess, I am a bit of an optimist in this respect, where science fiction and fantasy, it's really taken a center place in our pop and populist culture these days, and for better or for worse. However, for our queer and trans folks, I feel that it can elevate us and allow us an opportunity to, in a legitimate way, explore our identities. So yeah, I'm very pleased with where we're heading in that respect.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, sorry, may I say something? No, I was just thinking that I'm not sure that we are there yet. For sure, I'm just thinking, you know, the very first gay works published from out of the Caribbean were in 1993, 94. So, you know, simply because people didn't dare to do it. You know, so we're not really anywhere near that. You guys are talking more so from a North American, European perspective. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, and that you do bring up a very good point about the North American and European perspective, because not only, you know, we're bringing perspective, even geographical perspectives and cultural perspectives, and they're all tied. It's all tied together. Mm-hmm. And let's sort of move on to our next question, and talking terms about vocabulary and the practice of using they and replacing he or she, whether or not you feel that's a solution or if it's just making things worse. And what is the best way to, I think I heard David was using a different term than LGBTQ. And so I'm wondering what the most up-to-date version is of that, and how's the best way to stay on top of that kind of thing. I'm not sure. Well, David, do you want to go, just since I referenced that?
Sure.
Okay.
And we're speaking about language, and language it's amorphous. It's a living organism. It's constantly evolving and sidestepping and skipping and dancing with us. It's like the weather, right? To which end, like the language that's legitimate now may not be considered politically correct or valid, you know, just in 12 months from now, right? Typically, I say queer and trans and sometimes non-binary to encompass, you know, our community, the multiplicity of these identities. This long acronym, LGBTQ, et cetera, you know, it's a mouthful. So queer and trans, you know, QT BIPOC is something that often I find I'm saying in conversation. Queer and trans, Black, Indigenous, persons of color, just to encompass, again, the intersectionality of all of our lived experiences. I think it's very narrow just to speak only about gay identity or lesbian identity or the trans experience. I don't believe there's one such thing. It's an academic concept. It has value in that context, but if we're speaking about real life, then it's so important, as Nigel has pointed out, to consider all of the intersections of our lived experiences.
I love that, the queer, trans, non-binary, like it's just much more open and just includes so many more experiences. Kate, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I totally agree with what David was saying, and I think I think there are a few different levels, you know, when we're using language. You know, the first level is if you're talking about or to an individual, and I think there, the choice is always respect the person, don't be a jerk. Like, you know, if their pronouns are they, their pronouns are they. If their pronouns are they or e or whatever, then that's their pronouns, and you know, it's not a big deal to use them. So I think that part of it is fairly simple to my mind. Is just, you know, whatever, like what someone's name is what their name is, what their pronouns are, what their pronouns are. That's simple. Singular they, as a more inclusive pronoun, has been around for centuries, and it's very handy, you know, especially if you don't know the gender of the person. You know, somebody comes along, they might see my car, you know, it's a very handy word. You know, like everything else, you kind of have to rephrase your sentences sometimes to make sure that it's clear, but you know, that's when you have three people with a she pronoun in the same scene, you have to do that too. So I think it's just, you know, a matter of rephrasing where you need to, and just dealing with it. So I think, you know, being as inclusive as possible, recognizing that you're always going to mess up, you know, as David says, it's always evolving, and just, I think, always coming back to the baseline of being respectful of individuals to the greatest extent, is just sort of keep coming back to that, and we'll be okay, I think.
Well, and that brings me to a question that it's not on the list, but do each of you have sensitivity writers for your work before you publish it? I think that's the right term for them. Kate, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I haven't used paid sensitivity readers so far. I'm not against the idea, and I might do that. I've often had beta readers from particular communities who are fellow writers, and so I may not be specifically asking them to read with an eye to sensitivity, but I am getting a bigger view of things. I think it's a really complex question about, you know, what they're used for, and how they're, you know, and I think it's really important also not to put all of the onus on sensitivity readers as well. Like, I think they can really be helpful, but at the same time, no one person is not there to speak for a community or an identity as well. So it's sort of just one piece of the puzzle. But so I haven't really used them so far, but I'm definitely open to the idea, you know, in the future.
Right. So you're almost saying that the writer has to take responsibility for it. And, you know, the sensitivity writer can be the check, but really ultimately it's about the writer and needs to take responsibility.
Yeah, I think doing homework in advance helps a lot too. And I think a lot of the things, like, I think the worst thing that we can do as writers is to not do any research, write the thing, and then unload it on somebody else and say, tell me what I got wrong. You know, I think it's better to say, if, you know, when we're talking about problematic tropes, for example, every problematic trope has had someone write an essay about it already. So you can go out and you can find the essays about the problematic tropes and avoid them, you know, and then you're kind of one step ahead of the game, I think.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that it depends. I mean, if you are writing out of your own culture, you probably know that culture well enough so that you don't really need sensitivity reader. On the other hand, the other day somebody told me that he was writing a novel, and he's South Asian, and he told me he was writing a novel that dealt with First Nations characters. And I said to him, I would be loath to do that because there's just so much that one would have to find out about. On the other hand, I've created European characters, European in the sense of Euro-Caribbean characters. But these are people whom I know. My own grandfather, my maternal grandfather, fit that description. So these are people I know. It really does depend on your level of knowledge and your level of comfort as well. Yeah, that's how I see that.
Okay, thank you. David?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I'm thinking what I might add to what's already been said. I'll just first of all echo a really strong point Kate made, which is that no single sensitivity reader is going to represent their community, no matter how, you know, fine-tuned or how intersectional that person might be. I might be consulting with a trans woman of color. Nevertheless, she's not going to be able to speak for the community of trans persons or women of color by any means. So what they can offer is a point of view. And again, I'm echoing a point that's already been made. It falls back to us and the good editor, obviously. It falls back to me and my good editor to really take this kind of feedback and really in a respectful and a thoughtful and hopefully wise enough way that rests in my lived experience and my connection with community in a wise enough way to put out the art. And in the end, it is art. We're not putting out facts. It is a work, well, in my case, it's fiction that I put out. But again, although it is fiction in my case, I do want to be accurate and I do want to be respectful. And certainly I don't want to do harm. And there's this wonderful quote by Maya Angelou: do the best that you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. And that's been something I've really done my best to live by. So I'm constantly making mistakes and I'm constantly learning, and hopefully I'm constantly bettering myself.
Yeah, that's a great quote for all writers, I think. Because there's always that temptation to go back and admonish yourself for things you did wrong in the past, but really you did your best at the time, right? Yeah. So moving on, have you faced roadblocks to publishing or in marketing or presenting your work? And is that changing? Nigel, do you want to go first?
Yeah, from the very get-go, when my first novel, Spirits in the Dark, was published, and I sent it to Heinemann for its Caribbean Writers series, I was told that they couldn't publish it because that they published for a Caribbean market, and they particularly expect their novels, their works, to be used in the literature curriculum. And I quote, "No parent will allow his or her child to study your book," end of quote. I should say, however, that after Anansi accepted the novel, Anansi approached them again, and they actually did publish it. So, yeah. Yeah. I was often told by many people that they had intentions of giving my book to their friends as gifts, but once they realized that it featured a gay character, it was no, they weren't going to do it, and so on. And I mean, I know there've been discussions at home where even among librarians who didn't want to stop it, so yeah.
And is that ongoing? Is that still ongoing?
I really don't know, because I don't, those are not questions I ask. I know, for example, that in 2006, a bookseller took some books from me, and as late as 2019, and I think it might have been just about 6 or 7 copies. He still had copies of Spirits in the Dark, so I don't think I don't think things have changed really.
Yeah, David.
I don't feel I can properly answer this question. I don't, in the company of Nigel and Kate, I feel I'm the least experienced here. One receives, or I've received so many rejection letters, and 95% of them come with no explanation. What you're asking, what the roadblocks might be, it's hard for me to speculate. I might say it took me a while to have a publishing company pick up my first novel. And so my thanks go out to Guernica Editions for that here in Ontario. I did market the manuscript to publishers that specifically publish queer literature, right? And perhaps people can elaborate or correct me on this, but my sensibility was that there were 3 areas of publishing, and I fit in none of them, actually. And that was my impression. There's a genre of gay romance and gay erotica. And with all due respect, that's not what I write. And then there's another genre of trope fantasy, gay werewolves, gay vampires. Love that stuff. It's not what I It's not what my books were about. And then there's literary queer fiction that caters, and I say this affectionately, that caters to this intelligentsia of queer readers. And that was what my writing was about. I was really quite intentionally and conscientiously targeting young readership, not a young adult readership, but in our industry, what we call a young, new adult readership, readers in their early 20s, and that's the age of my characters. And I had a difficult time landing with a publisher who connected with that combination of qualities, that lighthearted prose that I was very intentional about, recognizing how young people aren't reading books as much as they used to in my generation, and also speaking to something very real and something very important around, again, the nuances of our lived experiences. Also, in my writing, it's very important for me to not be coy around depicting or writing about gay sexuality, right? We hear and read so much about straight heterosexuality in cinema, cinematic storytelling and literature and so forth. So I wanted to offer the same kind of realism and wanted to be forthright in depicting that. So I don't know, but I wonder if that might have put off some of the publishers that I had approached.
Yeah, so it could have been a combination of factors. So it's hard to sort of limit it to one. Yeah, absolutely. Well,
As you let me just comment. I tend to think that I think lumber literary in the several categories certainly acknowledge that people write in different ways. But my impression is that there are certain types of books, gay books, that don't sell, and usually they fall into the literary category. That's my impression. You know, so yeah. Actually, Sean Gray actually has his character, his protagonist, Arthur Less, say that in the novel. Of course, that book went on to win the Pulitzer, so it might not be true. So, yeah, but that's my impression. Yeah.
Okay, Kate.
Yeah, I don't have a lot. I think I've been enormously privileged in this regard, for many reasons. I think, yeah, and I mean, again, I've had a million rejections, and it's always hard to know the reasons behind those. And there are all these coded phrases about, we don't know how to market this, we don't know who the readership is, and you always wonder, what does that mean, really? But for the most part, I mean, my agent is fantastic. I've worked with fantastic editors, with short fiction, with long fiction. So yeah, I feel I've been very lucky in that regard. And I think there are some sort of systemic things out there that we all, no matter how lucky we are, we're all going to deal with still. I'm thinking even of just things like, there are these characters who go on, not fictional characters, trolls, I mean, who go onto Goodreads and 1-star every queer book they can find, for example. And often you'll also get reviews that talk about, like, the fact that you have a queer character or more in your book means that it's, political, like it's always political to have any marginalized characters or something. And so there's a sort of, there's all these sort of coded ways of reviewing and stuff that are still out there. But, like I say, that's sort of a very different level of barrier than some people have faced. So yeah, I feel I've been very, very supported in my career so far.
Wonderful.
Well, people have gone as far as begging me not to create gay characters. Your books won't sell. Stop creating great characters. Nobody's going to read them. So, but those are the books I write.
Thank you, Nigel, for persevering.
Absolutely. Okay, so then it brings us to, what are sort of some of the most common misconceptions? And I guess, I don't know, Linda, if you want to weigh in on what we were sort of asking for here in terms of maybe the misconceptions of what queer and trans and non-binary people are portrayed, and sort of what sort of does this, maybe I guess we're talking about stereotypes here. David, did you want to start?
Sure, we touched on this already at the beginning of this panel. I feel there perhaps are 3 chapters to this representation of queer and trans and non-binary folks. One is that we're villainous, we're mentally ill, etc. And the second chapter is, okay, let's tolerate those people, and as pitiful as they are, that's, our heart goes out to them. Oh, and oh dear, they die. Okay. And then there's this third chapter, which is still burgeoning, where they're, pardon me, there might be 4 actually, as I speak out loud. There's a third chapter where, oh, they're heroic, they've survived tragedy and trauma, and they're just these heroic figures. And pardon me, I skipped to the third. And I feel that's kind of where we are right now, and that's neither realistic either. And somewhere in there, there's this idea that, oh, they're just like us. Or they just happen to be in same-sex relationships, but they're just like the rest of us cis and hetero folks, which is not true at all, actually, and I can elaborate on that. So this is still a work in progress, this representation. So call it stereotypes, call it tropes. There might have been like 3 or 4 stereotypes 20 years ago. Now there's maybe 15 or 20 stereotypes. Great, they're still boxes. Okay, so we really need to kind of dismantle all of these boxes and understand that there's a fluidity again. I know I'm repeating myself, but this fluidity really is fed by this flow of intersectional experiences that has no boundaries. So as good writers, as good artists, it's so important that we are able to recognize that our lives are flowing, and to be able to put labels on people is very risky. It can be very crystallizing and empowering for some, these words, these labels, and for others, consciously or not, it can be very, what am I doing, right? Boxing us in like on a little Zoom meeting, and that's not real life at all.
So what are your thoughts? I'm curious, when you're saying you can expand on that, like what are your thoughts on how to break down those, like it's still the 15 stereotypes that exist, like what is the next, what's the next sort of step in that evolution?
Colleen, are you asking me?
Yes, I'm asking you. Sorry.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I have to say, and this is for Kate, my heart rests in speculative fiction and fantasy fiction and science fiction. And, I include Margaret Atwood as a speculative writer and so forth. So you're asking Colleen for me to imagine a future. I have no idea. I have a strong feeling, right, that there's something really magical that can happen as we become more sophisticated, more wise as writers. I think also what's important is that writing is no longer just this finite or very narrow art field, but it becomes a multidisciplinary art form but as we conflate it with the visual arts, with cinematic storytelling, with video game storytelling, with graphic novel storytelling. And so perhaps my vague response to answer might be, through the multidisciplinary arts, we might find a more cohesive, holistic imagining of our lives. I'll pass it over to Nigel or Kate.
Does anybody weigh in on either of those 2 questions?
Well, I don't know. I just think you present your characters as true to life as your imagination will allow you, according to your talent. Fundamental to everything that I write is my characters are always trying to make sense of their lives, and they use whatever knowledge they have in order to do so. Stereotypes in and of themselves might be impediments from outside. They might, I don't know. I mean, I know, for example, that I don't set out to counter anybody's stereotype, But at the same time, in my characters' interactions with non-queer trans people, those stereotypes very often get articulated. And I'm thinking, for example, of children and their parents, for example. In No Safeguards, the first book in my quartet, one of the things that the older boy has to do is confront his mother. It's at the time when same-sex marriage was legalized, and she's evangelical, and she's been primed to believe that gays are predators and so on. And he has to say, and finally he says to her, I hope, my mother, my mother would not want to belong to any religion that tells her to reject her children for any particular reason. So that's one way in which I confront the stereotypes. But other than that, yeah, I'm concerned with showing people leading their lives, and insofar as they can do so, with their ambitions and so on and so forth. Yeah, to me, that would be the best way of just countering the stereotype. Oh, regular human beings, we're some more complicated because of our sexual orientation.
Yeah, so you're more focusing on and sort of showing your reader what your reality is, or what the reality is of your story, to sort of.
Yeah, what the reality of my characters is.
Yeah. Kate.
Yeah. Again, this is a big question, and wonderful things said already. And I think, as a society, I think the sort of big answer is, if we want more and better trans characters, then we need to make more room for trans writers, and I think we need, it's I think often, we all do this, or at least, especially those of us who are white and privileged do this. I do this all the time, where we sort of have things backwards in our heads, and we think, how can we represent people, but I think the real answer is, how can we bring in the voices and make sure that everyone has a chance at the table? Because it's not enough for just, non-trans writers to represent trans characters. There has to be room for the writers themselves to tell those stories, and also to tell the stories in different ways. I'm one bisexual writer, but I certainly don't speak for that whole experience by any means. So I think just a multiplicity of voices is the way that we get beyond it as a society, and multiplicity of characters, just always growing and always trying to expand those boxes of what's available. And I think, it can be frustrating and silly, but, David was talking about Disney earlier, and I was thinking, even I do think it matters if Marvel has a gay character, I think having that kind of stuff, matters. I've got a kid, I've got a son, and I want him to grow up in that world where he's got gay Marvel characters. So, I think pushing the big corporations as well, and pushing the publishers is what we can do.
You brought up a good point when you were talking about mentioning research. So I'm curious, do you, as a queer, trans, non-binary, I can't remember, you said you're bisexual, is that what your writing is? So do you have to do research to adequately portray some of the other genders and identities in your fiction? Like, do you do that? Do you go based on your own personal experience, or do you go and actually do research on that?
Yeah, and I think, it sounds ridiculous, but I do research even on my own identities. I think,
Interesting.
I think, it's there's no fear greater than the fear of getting your own community wrong in some way, or you know what I mean? So I think the idea that it's only kind of outsiders who fear doing harm inadvertently, I think everybody's trying not to do harm. And I try not to be sexist, for example, even though I'm a woman, and so I think that there's all these sort of ingrained attitudes that we all have. So I do try to read, I read nonfiction from experiences of the kinds of people that I want to write a lot. I try to I write a lot of historical settings, so I often try to write about real people or ground my characters in people of the time who really lived, and so I get a sense from that, okay, this makes sense, that this kind of person had this kind of life, and so that feels authentic to me. And yeah, so I do a lot of research for everything, and I still manage to get things wrong. But one of the resources that I found really wonderful, and I don't know if I'm going to get the title exactly right, but Daniel Jose Older has a wonderful essay out there on the internet called, I think, 12 ways to write the other and the self, something like that. I'm going to put it in chat, but or maybe it's just writing the other and the self. But it's Daniel Jose Older, Older, and it's worth Googling. And he talks a lot about this idea of sort of, starting from a place of knowing you're going to get it wrong, doing your homework anyway, iterating on that experience and saying, yes, I love that Maya Angelou quote of like, do your best, then realize how it wasn't good enough, then do better, and just, keep working at it and realize that, sometimes you're going to get things wrong. And when you do, you apologize and do better next time. And I think that's the only way forward, really.
Mm-hmm. David, do you want to speak to your research in terms of when you're writing?
Yes, definitely. I just wanted to make a comment, and this might lead to a whole nother panel discussion, but it's a tricky affair when we're writing characters, and we want to write characters that are flawed, right? Of course we do. And it's tricky when we're writing characters that might say or do something racist or sexist and or homophobic or transphobic. And this is intentional as a writer, right? To create a more well-rounded human character. And these aren't villains either. These aren't antagonists. These are your protagonists, or these are good people who are, who have internalized and or who accidentally, through neglect or whatever reasons, might say, not might, we have them say or do something. So I'm just pointing out how it's always a tricky piece of business as a writer to ensure that when we showcase or write these characters, that we're not misunderstood as writers as endorsing those points of view. I don't know if anyone else can speak to this challenge.
How do you do that, David? People's reading skills vary. I remember when I was a high school teacher of English, having teachers militate against certain books. Mm-hmm. And they were doing so for the wrong reason. These were people who did not understand how irony functions.
Mm-hmm. For example.
Right. Yeah. And and I literally had to try to educate them, so to speak.
In my case, I write a lot of dialogue, a lot of conversations. So there's always a back and forth, these kind of platonic conversations, right? Back and forth, debating certain issues. So I want to trust and hope that I've done a good enough job in conversation with my editor, conveying the fact that, hey, this is a discourse, this is a debate. There's no right or wrong per se automatically. Nothing is black and white in the world. And let's kind of lean towards this more luminous understanding of what's happening right now, based on these characters' backgrounds, if that makes sense. So there's a process in conveying what I as an author want to convey to the reader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great answer in terms of talking about our characters are going to say and do things that are racist or sexist, and it's all part of having a realistic landscape so that you can provide context for people, so the story is accurate, so that then the role of the trans or the queer or the whatever character it is can be more legitimate, I guess.
You do have to find a way to undercut that sort of thing, though. If you just leave it, if you let it go unchallenged, it then becomes as if it's the author presenting that particular point of view. So you do have to find a way to undermine such negative representations.
Yeah, and one thing that I've sort of gradually been learning too is that when you have those negative moments in a story, even if they're perfectly justified is not the word I want, but even if they're within the story, it makes sense, and you're showing something important, there's still always going to be a reader who feels hurt by that, who reacts to that, right? And so and sometimes it's worthwhile. You have to do it anyway. You have to show somebody, hurting a woman in a misogynistic way in your fiction, but that every woman who reads that page is going to say, yeah, I recognize this, and it's hurtful to read. So I think that's something that I'm kind of learning to consider too, is not just, is this portrayal itself bigoted, but what is the effect on every reader who might happen across this piece of fiction? And have I thought about that carefully? And am I okay with what I'm doing here? Is it gratuitous, I guess, is what I'm saying. So that's something I think about now as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm going off topic slightly. Something that's very common in the Caribbean is spousal abuse. And there is no way of significantly denting it, because the entire system is constructed in such a way that that it's there, and it goes, they chip around the edges, but nothing significant is being done. And it's something that upsets me and engages me, and I deal with it. And because I put it in people's faces. I want them to see it, and I want them to be repelled by it, so that they might do something about it. So in that sense, I am probably an activist writer, and there are lots of people who have said that they don't like the way I do it. And I say, but you know why I do it? And they would say, yes. Well, do something about it. Yeah.
I'm just reminded, Cormac McCarthy is known for writing really a lot of violence, but it's always within a context and with a certain tone, right? And he's a good man, right? He's not endorsing this, but there is so much violence in his work, and it's meaningful. It's there to teach us, right? In its best moments, literature teaches and elevates our human condition.
And this is somewhat off topic as well, and for all of you, like, how much of that teaching and how much of that presenting these different experiences was part of what got you started as a writer? Anybody can jump in, whoever.
May I?
Yeah, absolutely.
So as a therapist for youth and young adults, right, I was encouraging kids to read, and there's so much awesome young adult queer and trans literature out there, and just period, queer and trans literature, but they weren't reading. And so I was very intentionally sitting down to write a book for my young, I call them my kids, for the young people that I work with, a book that was engrossing, that would immediately connect with them. So yes. So in a very deliberate and intentional way, I was writing this for a very, very specific audience in a very specific context.
And were you a writer before before you had that impulse?
Oh goodness, yes, of course.
Okay.
Although it was my first novel that I did publish, I have many unpublished manuscripts lying around. I have published a number of plays, and I published a fair number of short stories, and they're all speculative fiction. So this is very much just a radical shift for me to move to realism in contemporary literature. And of course I enjoyed it. Of course I was drawing from my own lived experience. Of course there was something cathartic as a writer in this process as well. So it was self-serving too, at the same time. And so it was with tremendous pleasure and joy, and it was very goal specific as I drove through these, or wrote these particular narratives and scenes as kind of educational pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I never wanted to be a writer, honestly. I never wanted to be a writer. And so I can only say that insofar as I'm one, it has really come out of psychic need. There was just something there I could not resist not writing. At a certain point, I simply had to write. And so I can safely say that the urge to write comes from deep within my psyche. And so, yeah, that's all I can say. You know.
Yeah. Well, considering you didn't want to be a writer, you've actually written quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. I think most people don't really want to be writers when they start to realize how hard it is. We're a little bit nuts. So we have to be compelled to it, I think.
Yes.
Yep.
Kate, did you want to answer that?
Yeah, I'm one of those who always did want to be a writer since as long as I can remember from when I was a kid. And so I think definitely my reasons have probably grown up with me as I've grown myself. But yeah, the differences of experience and ideas, exploring ideas has always been good for me. And you know, I often kind of half joke that everything I write is a response to Orlando by Virginia Woolf, and I think it is. You know, there's sort of that was so formative for me as a teenager, and it's problematic. It's a very problematic text, but it was also sort of a moment for me of realizing many things were possible, you know, not in life and in fiction, and just sort of like, wow, you know. And so that, I think, yeah, I sort of have that as a touchstone that I come back to. So it didn't really make me a writer. I think I was a writer before I read it, but it definitely changed my view as to what am I going to do with this then? How am I going to use my stories? And I guess I'm still working on that.
Well, it's a lifelong process, really. It's what being a writer is all about, I think.
Exactly, yeah.
So we have one more question, and we're sort of getting to the end of our sort of panel time regardless. So I guess why sort of we wanted to have this panel was, so where can authors go to stay informed, one, and learn more about how to represent these different characters, and just to, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this already, but just to open our awareness, just to learn, just to stay informed. Like what can you give us some tips on how to do that, I guess? Anybody can jump in.
Well, it just seems to me that the way you learn or stay and get informed is just simply to read. Or I guess films would probably also be a source of information, but it's to get information from a variety of queer trans. I'm using David's term, queer trans sources, and I spoke about Lambda earlier on. I mean, it's Euro-American as far as I can see, but you know, it's one of the better places to go, and so on. They do have a fair number of Hispanic authors in there, but there are Hispanic authors who have been very Americanized, I'd say. But it's one source. They do, and so on. Arsenal Pulp does a very good job of publishing LGBTQ literature, and quite a few of the publishers, Mawenzi House certainly does. My David's and my publisher Guernica publishes has a few, and so on. So yeah, there's where one goes. The films and certainly the published material. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think I find these things tend to snowball a little bit. So, you know, when you find one writer that you really like, then that'll lead you to another. And if you're the kind of person who is on social media, you know, just you can very deliberately kind of, you know, go and follow writers who don't share your own background, and, you know, not in a sort of creepy way or anything, and, you know, just sort of watch them. But, you know, I learn a lot from just following people on Twitter that are not like me, or in terms of background, and just sort of absorbing what they're saying, because, you know, when you see what they're mad about, then you start to think, oh, okay, there's something there's something to learn about, so that helps a lot if social media is your thing. And yeah, there are a lot of conferences. Colleen mentioned CanCon, which is my home conference here in Ottawa for speculative fiction, and CanCon has a lot of great panels, a lot of great writers. They're doing online events these days, but they're going to be back in 2022.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, here in Montreal, sorry, go ahead, David.
Sorry, go ahead, Nigel. Yeah.
No, I was just simply mentioning that here in Montreal, Chris DeRado has the Violet Hour, which focuses strictly on gay authors, and he brings them in from all across Canada sometimes. Yeah, and there's a great deal of space created for LGBTQ, queer, trans authors in the Blue Metropolis Festival here. So I just thought I'd mention that. So that's it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
I'm reminded of the Human Library Organization. It started in Denmark a couple decades ago, I believe, but it's spread about, it's all over the world, or at least they host events all over the world. The Human Library Organization, literally, no pun intended, literally it is what it sounds like. They lend out people, specifically people who live at the margins of society, people who are oppressed, people who are devalued, people who experience a lot of prejudice, a lot of stigma, a lot of stereotyping. So quite intentionally, there's a catalog of human beings that are gathered, and you can borrow these people and you can literally sit down with them and have conversations with them. Obviously, to challenge one's own entrenched, bubbled sensibilities, lived experiences. So I'm just reminded of this wonderful concept, which is more than a concept, this human library organization. In other words, let's do our research, talk to real human beings. Of course, let's watch the documentaries, let's read the good books, let's all watch Pose season 3, everyone, anyone, and talk to real people. I mean, if I'm going to be writing about young gay, trans, non-binary folks, I better be in conversation with them, right? These aren't sensitivity readers per se, but in the process of those conversations and hanging out with them and hearing their stories about their lived experiences of homophobia, joy, first dates, transphobia, envyphobia, coming out to parents, navigating pride for the first time in their lives, etc. And on, right? This kaleidoscopic, thing we call life. Listening to their stories is vital. If I'm a fantasy writer, if I'm a historical fiction writer, I'm still able to listen to stories, right? And translate, right? There's an emotional truth that I can only, or that can be, that I can cull from these kinds of stories, that I can embed and vitalize, with which I can vitalize any kind of fiction, whether it's fantasy or speculative or historical, if it's not contemporary. So people, let us talk to people, real people.
You see, David, I would actually probably go the other way. I would probably try to push them to acquire the skills so that they can tell their own stories. That's how I would probably prefer to go. Sorry.
Earlier before the panel, we were talking about Moonlight, the movie, the film that won the Academy Award. It's so curious, when I was researching it to share it with my young people, I realized that all of the persons involved in its creation are straight. The straight director who wrote the script did base it on a play by a gay playwright, but that's the extent of it, right? Interestingly, mind you, Brokeback Mountain back in the day, right? There are no queer, trans people, or gay people involved in that at all.
Right.
Annie Pruitt and the director, Ang Lee, and the actors, they're all straight, which is why last year in 2020 it was such a big deal, right? When The Boys in the Band was redone by an entire project was headed by gay director, gay actors, and out celebrity gay actors, albeit almost all white cis persons, but still, that was something, a rare moment in our history. Hopefully we'll see more of those events. So Nigel, you make a very, very good point. Let's empower folks to speak and tell their own stories.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to pick up on with what David's saying too is I really appreciate how David keeps talking about, talking to young people. And, one thing about, queer experience is not only is it different by geography, but it's very different by generation too, that there's a huge difference in what a 20-year-old today, what their experience is going to be like than someone who's 60, even in the same country or the same city. And they're going to have different ideas about words to use, about how relationships work, about how we to navigate community, all of that stuff. So that's a nuance that is important to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when queer was a pejorative, was a negative word, right? And when kids started saying queer, it's like, whoa, I needed to shift and expand my brain. Like, I'm old enough to remember when Michael Jackson came out with an album called Bad. I remember when the kid first said, "Oh man, David, that's so sick." I'm going, what? It's sick, excuse me? Right, again, it comes back to language. Again, it's so contextual, generational, it's amorphous, it's fluid, it's alive. It warrants paying attention to. And if that attention falters, then I become anachronistic as a writer.
Right. Wow, thank you. Those are absolutely fantastic notes to end on. I love, David, your idea, or your just the thought of talking to these people and talking to not these people, but talking to people on whatever level. Because we would read a lot, but ultimately it's when we connect with another person that we learn the most, I think. And hopefully we can then try to accurately represent their experiences. Thank you, everybody, so much for sharing your experiences and your knowledge and your wisdom on this topic. We generally tend to open it to questions from the floor now. So if anybody has a question, they can just unmute their mic and fire away.
Okay, I have a question. I always seem to like to ask this question of writers because I'm genuinely curious about their responses. And my question is, what nurtures your spirit, your soul as a writer?
Well, if I may answer, first and foremost, it's observation, it's thought. I find that one has to spend a great deal of time just simply thinking, reflecting, letting one's mind go, and certainly reading. Reading, as far as I'm concerned, is a writer's food. It sets you, it triggers things that you take off on, and you go down certainly avenues of thought once those thoughts have been triggered. That's essentially what it is in my case.
Kate or David, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, for me, I think it's similar things of definitely other forms of art. So as well. So I'd say music is very key for me. And sometimes if I'm feeling that the well is dry, just wandering around an art gallery, if in the times when we can do that.
Yeah, it's true.
Rosanna, I'll distill what I think I heard Nigel and Kate both say, which is imagination. Right? When I'm feeling exhausted, when I'm blocked, when I'm feeling just numb or disconnected, I return to a practice of nurturing, refueling my connection to imagination. So whether that's through a connection with the arts, visiting an art gallery, Netflix, I gotta say, there's really great quality stuff on there. The more fantastical, the better, right? Just so I can stretch and exercise and massage my tired soul, and afterwards, whoa, everything just flows, right? Whether I'm writing realism or not, that that imaginative process inside of me is jump started, and then it begins to flow again. Connecting with nature, I think, interestingly, as that might sound, just walking in a forest, just being very mindful, attuning to my senses, cleansing my mind, and just really being embodied in the nature really helps me when I return to my little Apple Mac, laptop. So yeah, imagination.
Nature gives me poetry mostly. For fiction, it's something else. Yeah.
I think creators, whether they be artists or writers, become inspired by other creators, and in other avenues of life, whether it's drama or art. Or the living natural world, as David says, like the forest in my backyard. I always feel rejuvenated once I go and spend time among the trees and nature. So thank you for your responses.
Does anybody else have a question?
Can one of us non-famous authors answer that question too?
Absolutely.
Well, I'd be, my first reaction was my silly one, which is beer, because that's my favorite beverage. But seriously, I was thinking about it, and I think David hit the imagination part, because for me, what nurtures my writing and keeps me writing, although I've been doing a couple of years of editing now, it seems, is what comes out on the screen, and when I have no idea where it came from, and I read it and go, "Wow, where did that come from?" And I just feel so good. It's just a surprise. And then when I go back and read things and I find clues behind the characters, I just give you an example. I did one on twins, and one was died at birth and one lived, whatever. Then I went back, and I didn't realize when I wrote it, because when I was writing it, I didn't know when it started. I didn't know when it died at birth. I wrote one was evil and one was good, and that was my premise to start writing. But on the wall, there was a baby picture hanging under a cross, and there was a secret photo album the parents kept and things like that. An even weirder thing that came out for me, I was writing about a cult, and the woman's name was in the protagonist, if you will, there were kind of two protagonists, was Salacia. I thought I made that name up until a reader came to me and said, "What a great name you picked for that character." And I was too embarrassed to ask her why, because I had no idea. So I Googled it when I got back to my screen, and Salacia is I don't even know if it's Roman or Greek, but it was a deity, a goddess, involved with, I guess, Neptune or Trident or whoever. I can't remember now. And I went, and it kind of fit. It kind of fit the story. And I thought I made the name up. So somewhere in my subconscious, I obviously read something and there's, whatever. But those things are the things that really kind of nurture my desire to write and keep going, because these surprising things come out that I don't anticipate and don't plan. So it's, subconscious imagination. I'll leave it there.
I have to jump in. Oh, pardon me.
No, you're good.
Am I interrupting some? I have to jump in and say and share how often when I'm writing dialogue, not often, but frequently when I'm with regularity, when I'm writing dialogue, my characters will say things that surprise me. Sometimes they'll say things that are contrary to my intentions for the character or my understanding of the character. And sometimes I'll fight my characters and I'll say, "Hey, you can't say that." But of course, they're speaking from a truthful place, and this truthful place, it rests in me. But there's this idea that does it rest in me as artists, as alchemists. We're writers. We're as alchemists. Elizabeth Gilbert wrote a book called Big Magic on creativity, and she spoke about how how we're visited by ideas. We're visited by this artistic knowledge. We don't produce them, but we're conduits, right? She's not the first person to espouse this whimsical or philosophical or spiritual idea. But I hear when you speak, Bruce, I'm reminded of this sense that as artists, we're not working on our own, but we're in communion, consciously or not, with a wider universe.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, when when I'm creating a character, let me speak for myself. And sometimes I get to an impasse where there is some knowledge that I require, that the character requires in order to progress. You have to go and look for it. That's research, and so it's one's knowledge complemented by research, because in the final analysis, really, when you have completed a character, you've completed a novel. It's, in a sense, it's a coming together of your knowledge, the knowledge that you brought to it, the knowledge produced via your imagination, and the knowledge that you've acquired by way of research. I mean, that's how I look upon a finished work.
Does anybody have our last call for questions? Does anybody else have any more questions?
Right.
Okay, well, thank you again. I'm feel very grateful to have such amazing panelists tonight. It's been wonderful. We have the links for all of your books will be on our website following the meeting. I'm going to hand it back to Linda, and she's going to just finish up for the evening.
Hello, everybody. Well done, panelists. Lots of insight, lots of experience shared, so thanks for that. So open mic, I think you can just raise your hand and let me know if you'd like to read some of your work to us or present your work. Anybody?
Well, I certainly want to.
Okay, well, Bruce beat you to
Jose.
Yeah, so Bruce, why don't you start us off, and then we'll go to Nigel next.
All right.
I think you have a third person on, Marie-José.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
First, I apologize for joining late. It was an excellent discussion. I wish I had been able to catch more. With the homeschooling, we're looking after grandkids 2 to 3 days a week. And I had to run out and get some stuff that I need tomorrow to do the projects that I don't get done when the grandkids are here. So yeah, I apologize, but I really appreciate the discussion I did catch. What I'm going to read is the last part of a chapter from YA novella, which I'm hoping to get out independently published this fall. Just a quick background, because we'll be jumping into it. 3 high school teenagers, Matt, his twin sister, Ashley, their best friend, Sadia. They're spending midterm break with Sadia's aunt Irene, do some snowshoeing and cross-country skiing. And this is a very traditional adventure mystery type story. So they're on their first snowmobile outing, heading to the site of a mysterious explosion that happened just before they arrived and blocked off the road on their way in. So they're in the midst of the middle of the ride right now. After another 10 minutes, Aunt Irene stopped to make sure we were good. We turned off our engines and had a stretch. Ash exhaled a small cloud that hung in front of her face. Can you believe how quiet it is? We stood focused on the silence, not a breath of breeze. It was like the forest was frozen in time. How far left to go? I whispered. I really didn't care about seeing the site of the explosion. I just wanted my turn driving. Matt is this week's protagonist. Irene straddled her seat. Not much further. about 10 or 15 minutes at our current pace. We started the sleds and sped down the winding trail. Other than what came through our headsets, it was impossible to hear anything about the growl of the engines. Hey, Sadia, what's it like up front? Awesome, you're going to love it. How about turning it up a notch? No problem, hold on. We raced forward. It was an adrenaline rush. As the hills grew steeper and the turns grew sharper, I could feel Sadia easing off the throttle and using the brakes more often. I should have said up front that he's riding with Sadia, who's driving, and Ashley's on with her aunt. Ahead of us, Sadia's aunt gave a hand signal to slow down. Over the headset, we heard, I'm checking the map. After a brief stop at a branch in the trail, we veered onto the left fork and got back to cruising speed. Sadia let Irene and Ashley pull ahead a safe distance as we had been instructed to do in our lesson. A couple of kilometers along the trail, aunt and sister dropped from view as they started down an incline. When we reached the crest, they were halfway down a steep slope. Sadia gave the throttle a short burst and we careened over the edge in pursuit. My stomach rose, almost like being on a small roller coaster. The machine gripped the snow beneath us and we accelerated down the hill. The trees flew by. It was amazing. I clenched Sadia's waist. I so wanted to drive. Irene was still a ways ahead of us, approaching a right turn at the bottom. Their brake lights came on. The machine's back end fishtailed. Irene must have hit the gas then because the skidoo lurched forward, straightening out, hugging the inside bank of the turn. Her left hand flew out for a second, waving wildly. What's that about, Sadia? Don't know. Irene's voice screamed through the earphones. Stay right. A sled coming at high speed. Stay right. Sadia released the accelerator. Someone's on the trail. She turned the handlebars to move us over. She hit the brake hard, too hard. The machine broke loose. The rear skidded sideways towards the center of the trail. I leaned uphill, trying to keep the skis and track from catching an edge and flipping us. Sadia did the same. Shit, double shit. She fought the handlebars, but the snowmobile had a mind of its own. We continued sliding at a 45-degree angle down the trail. Sadia leaned into the controls. I can't stop it. We were plowing a thin layer of snow ahead of us. The path we left behind glistened, bare ice. I glanced down the hill. A single headlight flew into view from around the bend, passing Irene's sled. The oncoming driver's feet were anchored to the runners, hands to the handlebars. The rest of his body was cantilevered over the middle of the trail in an attempt to counteract the centrifugal force. He passed so close to Irene's skidoo that before she and Ashley disappeared around the corner, his hip nicked Ashley, nudging her to the right. He straightened out, now aimed directly at us. Our machine continued its angular slide. The oncoming headlight filled my vision. Sadia's voice echoed in my helmet. Lean into the hill. We're going to roll. I clamped my fingers around the seat strap and bent so far to the right, my shoulder was mere centimeters from the ice. Our snowmobile slowed as a result of the effort, but the rear end shifted even further into the trail. The other sled didn't slow down. It sped up. He's heading for the space behind me. There's no way he can fit, not a chance. 20 meters from us, his outside ski bit into the bank. At this speed, he'd be on us in 3 to 4 seconds. Our skidoo rocked, slipped a bit more, then held its place. I loosened my grip on the strap, ready to eject. Should we jump? No time to clear. Lean into me. I leaned forward, trying to avoid being struck, my chest pressing Sadia's back, pinning her to the windshield, my body shaking. 15 meters away, the approaching sled lurched upwards. Defying gravity, it hugged the almost vertical side of the snowbank. The driver was all but standing on the side of his machine to keep from rolling. 10 meters. He yanked the skis, leaned further to the right. Somehow the machine found the top of the embankment. It hit an outcrop of snow or ice. Its front end rose into the air. 5 meters. The driver stretched out over the sled's handlebars like a ski jumper leaning over his skis. The sun glinted off the black, faceless visor. 2 meters. The machine slammed back onto the embankment, angled towards the trail, towards us. Its skis began to leave the embankment, shattering against the snow like giant teeth snapping their way towards a feast. He was on us. I stiffened, closed my eyes, waiting for the sickening crunch. End of the chapter.
Nicely done.
That was awesome, Bruce. I love the teeth chattering, like, what was you said? Teeth chattering, like coming to eat you something? That was awesome.
Like giant teeth snapping their way towards a feast.
Yes, that was excellent.
Okay, so Nigel, are you ready for us? You have to unmute.
Yeah, I'll be reading a short section from my latest novel, Easily Fooled, and you're hearing the protagonist's voice. He is a Methodist minister at this particular point. He will soon leave because he's in conflict with Methodist beliefs, but he also went into the ministry deluded that he can be celibate, which is a condition that the Caribbean Methodists impose on their gay ministers, and so on. His parishioner has already outed him and tried to seduce him, and this is sort of a follow-up to that. That night, he fell asleep after 2 a.m. and dreamed that Horton and he were naked in bed, and Gladys and Elijah stormed in on them. He awoke around 5 a.m. frightened. If he still believed in prayer, he would have prayed, as he'd done many times before, to be cleansed of such desire. Gladys was his treasurer at AMC Hastings. There was such selflessness in her, a desire to give and give again, as the hymn says, always willing, always to perform any task. From chauffeuring members around to coordinating fundraising activities to visiting shut-in members. She taught math at Cumberland, and her effusive warmth showed that she was a fine, caring person. Her face, caramel, rotund, with a dimpled smile, slight buck teeth, and sparkling hazel eyes, held a childlike innocence. She told him that her favorite hymns were All Things Bright and Beautiful, and Will There Be Any Stars in My Crown? When a fundraiser they'd had to repair the church roof fell short of what they'd expected, her response was, behind every cloud, there is a silver lining. We'll look for it and work hard to find it. We'll have other activities and we'll work even harder. She knows now that sometimes what looks like silver is often tin. There wasn't an iota of malice in her smiling, bouncing butterball body. To wrong her would have been unpardonable. The second time Horton and Millington met to plan synod business, 5 persons were present. At the end of the meeting, he tickled Millington's palm in their goodbye handshake. Slowly, he came around to accepting what his dreams were already telling him, that he desired Horton. Did Horton awaken his sexuality? No, more like that coal fire that's burning below ground in Pennsylvania. Give it air and it will conflagrate. Horton had merely set ablaze what had long been smoldering. He found himself repeating in his sleep, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. At breakfast the next day, he'd remember the dream and mutter, do not desire your church treasurer's husband. And so war ensued between his sexual desire and the ethical behavior he'd vowed to exemplify. During the day, he imposed a truce, but at night, desire laid siege to his psyche. He'd awaken, his pajamas damp with semen, relieved that he'd only been dreaming, and console himself with the thought that he wasn't responsible for what happened when he was asleep. But on those occasions when he supped with them, he returned home guilt-ridden. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Nigel.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Very good. Excellent.
Yes, quite evocative.
Mhm.
So we have Marie. Is it Josie?
Yes, Marie-Josée.
Marie-Josée. Okay, please. She's come to sing a song for us.
Yes, I wanted to thank you. It was a great evening. I would have loved the 2 other writers that would share some of your work. But anyway, it's up to you. And also, I really find it's great about what it was the topic. It made me think a lot. Me, I'm First Nation, part First Nation Algonquin, and you should involve the two spirits in your LGBTQ. So, but very interesting. It's yeah, really. I want to thank you very much for all the three of you sharing. Because as a creator too, I have some issue in there, and it's I don't think it's that open, and it's already we have already in this world right now, it's everybody's checking on what you're gonna say, how you're gonna behave. I mean, we're all on our tush right now, and also I find it so racist in the world. Like, so we put this on plus, so it's just like so. I found it's severe anyway. So, but anyway, so it's also my experience. So, yes, Colleen, when you introduced at the beginning, I prepared you a song, but when you share about among the land we are on and also the residential school, I twist it, and so I'm going to present you one of my songs I made for the missing and murdered Indigenous women. I'm just a channel, me. Oh oui, I forgot to say I'm an adoptee, so by the intermédiaire of a Jesuit. So fait que it's like if I understand, the missing women and also the children when they went to residential school. I did not go there, but it's something, it's really touched me inside and deep. So I've been learning some Abenaki for several years. So I'm going to practice. I translate one of my songs. It's in French. It's called Pour vous, mes sœurs. But I will sing it in Abenaki for you tonight. So it's called Odze Kewan Nidzakasowak. Kean Nidzakaso and Abana me onwe Kea. Kea Nidzakaso and Abane me onwe Kea. Asma, 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 asma. Asma, 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 asma. Kea Nidzakaso and Abana me onwe Kea. Kea Nidzakaso and Abana me onwe Kea. Pour vous, mes sœurs, que je ne verrai plus jamais, jamais, jamais. Pour vous, mes sœurs, que je ne reverrai plus jamais, jamais, jamais. Jamais, 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 jamais. Oh, 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 oh. Pour vous, mes sœurs disparues, assassinées. Oh, pour vous, mes sœurs disparues, assassinées. jamais, jamais, asthma, asthma, asthma. Asthma, 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 asthma. Odzik, Ewan, Itzakaswak, and Abana, Meonwek, Ewan. Odzik, Ewan, Itzakaswak, and Abana, Meonwek, Ewan. Asthma, 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 asthma. Asthma. Odzik, Ewan, Itzakaswak. 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 Oli, Oli, thank you very much.
Nice,
That was fantastic. Thank you so much.
nice. Well, that was really, yeah. I even like your background. My cat even decided to come along and listen. He even liked it.
I put one of my photograph in the back, so it's we don't see it. Though it's a part of a church too. So
Oh, yeah, I didn't see the church. Yeah, I was liking the background. Nice. Do we have anyone else for open mic?
I will if nobody else wants to go. I don't want to take somebody else's spot though.
Well, no one else has raised a hand, so I think you should go ahead, Kate.
All right, I'll read a couple of pages from my novella, which is called Alice Payne Arrives. So I'll put that in chat. There we go. So I'll just read the first couple of pages and I think I can open it here. Line it up here, okay. So, Chapter 1, Concerning a Robbery and What Comes After. 1788. The highwayman, known as the Holy Ghost, lurks behind the ruined church wall. Lurking has a different quality to waiting, she reflects, having time for reflection. Waiting is what she did for the first 5 years after father returned from the war in America, much changed. That's how everyone put it that first year. How is Colonel Payne? Oh, people say he's much changed. Now people use the same tone to say the opposite. How is Colonel Payne? Oh, he's much the same. No change, his poor daughter. Alice grew tired of waiting for change. Colonel Payne's poor daughter does not fade into the background. She hides in it. She's quivering in the saddle, rider, hat, and gun all cocked after a fashion. Ah, there it is. A carriage comes rattling around the corner, the horse's gait slowing as the slope rises toward Gibbet Hill. Alice lurks halfway up. Behind her on the summit, there are no trees but those of the Tyburn sort, swinging with cages and corpses as a warning to highwaymen. It seems to have worked. She has this section of Dray Road, fenced in with trees and ruins, all to herself. The road here is a hollow way, a track worn into the ground over the centuries, its banks curving up like the bottom half of a tunnel on either side, a trap for her victims. What a gaudy contraption the Earl of Lutterworth uses to get around the country. Half painted gold as if he were Marie Antoinette, its 4 lamps lit, although the sun is still bloodying the forest. 4 horses plumed. That dark bulk on the seat is the coachman and footman, both liveried like dancing monkeys, no doubt. Inside, it's big enough for 4, but there will only be 2. The odious Earl will be traveling with his manservant. That makes 4 men, 2 of them armed with swords and probably pistols too. Loaded, maybe, but not cocked. Her left calf nuzzles her horse's belly. Havoc's withers twitch, and he steps quietly to the right, making no sound until she taps fast with both legs and they are out in the open. By the time Havoc stops in the middle of the road, where he stopped so many times before, she has both pistols in her hands. "Stand and deliver," she growls. The first time she did this, she felt exposed, despite the hat low over her forehead, the black mask and green kerchief, the long gray cloak, the breeches and boots and gloves. She and Jane had meant it half as a lark. Jane was not convinced Alice would go through with it until she had. It was revenge the first time, against a teacher of the pianoforte who preyed on any girl who was not sufficiently warned by her friends. Revenge and a little much needed money. Now it is a regular affair, this robbery on the road. There are plenty of villains making their way through Hampshire, ready to be relieved of a purse, a blow struck in secret for womankind. Despite the fact that all the victims are men of suspect character when it comes to women, no one has made that connection or suspected that the Holy Ghost is a woman, much less that it is Alice. All her skin is covered, lest the color of it call to any local's mind Colonel Payne's poor daughter. Today, after a dozen robberies, she does not feel exposed. She doesn't feel like Alice Payne, sitting on a horse in the middle of the road in a disguise. She's the Holy Ghost, and she's about her vengeful business. Thank you very much. And thank you all for reading. That was so lovely.
I enjoyed that. That was a good reading.
Thank you.
The Holy Ghost, I like that. Do we have anyone else who wants to be in the open mic? Just raise your hand. Oh, Seeley, you have to unmute yourself and have that.
Oh gosh, I do apologize for not being able to join until now. It's been a full night. Could I get a little framework? It's my first time to visit. Do you have, you know, a preference of not more than 4 minutes, or, you know, kind of how do you frame this?
Yeah, 5 minutes, it's all genres. So poem, story, music.
Okay.
Doesn't matter. So 5 minutes, that time frame, yeah.
Okay. I would be happy to contribute, but in 1 more minute, I just want to kind of gather myself.
Okay. Well, while you can gather yourself, I have something I can read. So I've just finished, I think, draft 2.5 and then some of a science fiction cli-fi novel that I'm working on. I just want to read the log line that I'm working on. It's not really complete yet, just to give you an idea of the book in a quick way. Slain songstress and eco-activist Skylar Khalid is awakened in the distant future to find herself in a tranquil world governed by the all-too-perfect AI. It may have saved them from the climate collapse, but what is it hiding? Were Skylar and her band of newly awakened there to save humanity? I gotta practice that, sorry. So basically, Kate brought us to the past, and I'm bringing us about 4,000 years in the future. And this is from chapter 22 called Dreamy. And it's just a scene where Skylar, she's been taken on a world tour of this new world she's been brought to. And she's met a character, and she's been very stressed out. She hasn't had a good awakening at all in this new world. She's had a lot of stress, and she's PTSDing over some of the incidents that have happened to her since, to make it short. So Skylar remembered meeting a man. No, a woman, a thee or thy, a man who dressed as a beautiful woman. She liked thy. As usual, Sky didn't get a name. Thy wore a puffy silver gown that gleamed rainbows at every perfect movement. Thy explained they don't use gender references in their language. Isabella had found a new tea and had started passing it out to her during the closing ceremonies of the games. The drink was intensely bitter, but she hoped it would be potent. Skylar wasn't sure if it was why she thought the closing games were better than the opening. The same Giants dance, lasers, fireworks, lights, and music, but with the addition of medal presentation. Pika Tanupa, where she's from, made fourth, while some of their athletes had firsts in the brain challenges. The Congo was first. New Australia was a close second. It seemed like all the athletes were given some kind of award. She supposed showing up is good for something. As the ceremony came to a close, the frayed and dry guitar strings holding her body together were invisibly exchanged for plastic bands, allowing her to feel detangled and relaxed. She was so tired of everything. The nightmares of her jungle monsters, Raphael, Aurora, and the wild roaming beasts, how she felt when she caught Raph's odor or heard his raspy voice, her neck and shoulder pain, her turning stomach. She wanted a trip, a vacation from her tormentor by day and the ghosts that haunted her by night. She found herself dancing to strange music that pulled her strings as though she were a marionette. Colored lights flowed weightless in the air as she floated in, free. Colored glowing ribbons flowing out of the trees surrounded the magical bonfire, the shrubs and flowers too. She looked at Thigh, at her side. Neon green streamers flowed from Thigh like they were reaching up towards all the lights that surrounded them. They were as fine as the mushroom roots she first saw at orientation, the ones in the quantum computer that were part of I. Mushy, she laughed as she sounded out mushrooms. Thigh laughed. And lion's mane and cordyceps. In the acai and goji berry juice, you will feel rested tomorrow and without anxiety. I'm feeling fine right now. Skylar felt like time was moving slowly. She looked up at the stars. No strings there. Too far away? I am seeing delicate, glowy ribbons in living things. I see them coming from you. She put her hand in the air and watched how thy strings slowly, gently reached out to her and curled without binding or tightening. She was glad of that. That would freak me out. You're touching me, even going right through my hand, her whole body filled with love. Wondrous, I said. Your eyes are open to the connectivity of life. They lay on a lounger and gazed into the night. I will write a song about this. I am grateful to be present as you see this for the first time. She laughed. You write music? I do too. I will also write a song, and I shall call it String Quartet. They giggled. She waved her hands in slow, flowing motions and watched Thigh's ribbons magically follow her, the stars twinkling in the clear night sky behind them. Then David appeared. Did he float in on a magic carpet? Probably not, but he did whisk her away from the friendly arms of the fairy godmother, who was Thigh. She found herself in her room. Sydney hovered over her like a gorgeous porcelain doll. Sydney's an 11-year-old. She saw blue and purple strings connecting him to everything, even her hairbrush. Sid's youthful skin glowed in the dark. So pretty, she remembered saying. I love you, he said as he crawled into her bed. He kissed her, long and awkward, her eyes filled with the salty water of hysterics. She couldn't stop laughing. Such a cute kid. He disappeared in a comical puff of smoke, outlined in black ink. Life was wonderful in a cartoon, where falling down a canyon was safe and exciting. Her mother was waiting for her at a campfire at the edge of a curve in the river. She could smell the roasting weenie her mom turned over in the flames. She'd never gone camping with her family. No words were exchanged, but Sky could feel her disapproval. Always disappointing everyone. This is not your style, Mom, she said. Too quiet. So her mom would have passed away 4,000 years ago.
Thank you, Linda. That was great.
Thank you. Celie, are you ready?
Sure. No.
Awesome. I will mute myself.
Okay, so this is, I'm going to share one flash piece, I'll call it, and just a little tiny excerpt of another. This piece is called Submerge. I've reserved a cabin overnight for rare retreat with a visiting comrade. We've hugged upon meeting, then hiked out to the coastal haunt, kept conversation satisfying and mundane. Arriving at dusk, first looking into the magic beachfront shack. As he waits at the entrance, I touch a finger to the small of his back from behind, gently direct him forward. Inside, we set up supplies, plan time to spend at the shore before leaving tomorrow. Yielding to the undertow, before him I unzip my fly and dab a goodly dripping from inside over his upper lip. His nostrils flare, inhaling kelp, salt brine, gritty miso, ferment. Next I move his butt, dear me. Next I move his boots and a hint of calamari wafts forth. I'll shuck his socks to tongue soft suckers. I grasp the backside of his jeans and pressing further in feel a density of swordfish flesh. In front a tusk, pointed to pierce murky depths. He reaches towards my pants, but I want to be the discoverer. This time, diving within, I fish out a sticky handful of roe, pull open his jaw and smear caviar between his teeth. I suggest he hold it there before swallowing. Let saliva bring out the egg's flavor, but too beguiled down his maw it goes. He blushes, starts to speak, stalls. I say, yes, stammer for me. His face now a fisted anemone, unsure whether to bloom. His throat sinews undulate, gulp, then release and flow. I delicately lap his neck's pulse to relax it, then bite. His sound sees, and he likes this tease. Half an hour after I first present and tempt him with spunk, he manages to probe between my legs, yielding sand traces and seed pearls that pour off his palm. We retire to the bathtub for our leisure with the tide pool in my lap. A muscle's nudged from its sheath. A hum ripples farther when he lets his face submerge. Our seas stretch deep till squids stir and squirt ink. We drink and dissolve in the cloud. And the other little excerpt I'd like to share is from a larger epistolary text called Messages in Bottles. Reaching an edge of Montreal bordered by the St. Lawrence River, you pitch the message. Sea's service dog scouts along the waterline nearby, finds and fetches the bottle. Dear C, I miss you. You ever consider the fact of being in 5 big car and bike crashes so far, that you've had at least 5 concussions in adulthood? And so can't venture again without crampons after an ice storm, risk slipping to head slam repeats. You can't forget, even though your memory's narrator has become less reliable. Ellipsis. I go on faith you'll get this message and reply. Water, current, border crossing habitat of mixed fluids, the effort of bottle containing, gambling, trust. These will bring precious words back to me. Waiting and seeking, Q. C returns to make a solid toss into waves. Her next message will go downstream, but a humpback whale heading upriver carries the vessel. It washes up where Q stumbles over it. Dear Q, I slide with you into this surreal space, breaking the logic for constructing our narratives. Resist the pressure of clarifying whose voice, what's non-fiction, etc. I couldn't even fabricate a missive how I wished, just got lucky a whale arrived to carry it. As someone said at the end of May, when whale came to Montreal, Humans, whales, and land mammals sometimes are vagrants that go in unusual places. I think it's a crypt too, to ally with for stubborn cross-species survival. We're on me through exhaustion, communication errors, numbed hands, dislocated hens, with jouissance nonetheless. Embracing joyous energy even more, knowing it's so precious. Casting notes forth to be transmitted, depending only on safe enough passage to carry them, and on adventurous receivers to actively adopt the messages. Merci for tuning to the mix, letting hold the wayward muse, hints, admissions, and commitments. We must believe our records will be yours.
That was really nice.
Yeah.
Actually, both were good. What was the last line of the first one? I like that one.
What was
So
it? Hang on.
I liked it anyway. It was good.
Our seas stretch deep till squids stir and squirt ink. We drink and dissolve in the cloud.
Yeah, that's nice.
Lovely.
Well done. Okay, well, I think that brings us to time. So just a few closing things. Please sign up for our newsletter. That way you will get the links to the next Zoom. We only send out one newsletter a month, and it's the week of our Word Ups. The next one is July 8th. It's on characters with special needs in fiction. So basically, we want our stories to be well-rounded types of diverse characters. And since some of our greatest real-life heroes are not able-bodied, like Rick Hansen or Terry Fox, we can aim to develop thoughtful stories that acknowledge and include them. So far, we have Emma Pabato confirmed on the panel. We have some feelers out for others, just no confirmations. So you'll have to stay tuned, I guess, and look at our website, wordupbarrie.com. And we've got some other really cool news. In September, we're going to run a workshop with a lady called Deborah Joy, and she is a sort of a theatrical coach and a voice coach. And so the workshop is so that we can learn to read our work better. So I've been at this for 6.5 years, and I remember starting out wanting nothing more than to get to the end. And I sounded probably like a jackhammer when I read. And of course, I didn't have to MC because we had Bruce Meyer, Barrie's poet laureate, doing all the emceeing. So I've had to force myself to improve, I think. And one of the reasons I wanted to do create an organization like Word Up was so that I could learn to read my work, because it's terrifying. It's even worse than trying to run a workshop on something technical. So Deborah Joy, look for that information on specific dates and times and links and signups and all that stuff. And we'd like to thank the City of Barrie for their support and their sponsorship. And hopefully we see you again July 8th.